In this tutorial, I'm going to go over with you a little shortcut in counting significant figures. So if remembering or referring back to the rules in the textbook is getting confusing for you, hopefully this method will help you out some. So really the only thing with this method that you need to have some awareness of is the geographical placement of the oceans in regards to the US. So this is my kind of rough map of the US, and I have my Pacific Ocean over here by California and my Atlantic Ocean, which is over here by Florida. So right now I'm just kind of putting those numbers on the map as you get used to this. Obviously you don't have to draw a map every time, but it's just to kind of help that visual as we get started. So remember, significant figures are important to us because they tell us about measurement numbers, and we know how accurate those numbers are based on the number of significant figures. Unfortunately, significant figures goes beyond just counting how many numbers are there. That can be followed if the numbers are 1 through 9, but when you start hitting zeros, that's whenever it gets weird. Are those zeros just placeholders, which in that case they're not counted as significant figures or just a placeholder, or are those zeros part of the actual measurement, which in that case we would want to make sure that we include those when counting up our significant figures so we know how accurate that particular measurement is. So I have listed 5 examples of measurements. I went ahead and put them on the map. You will notice that there's basically one question that you have to ask yourself when you are faced with a measurement that you are wanting to calculate or determine the number of significant figures, and that is essentially if a decimal point is present or if a decimal point is absent. And based on your answer is going to then drive how you will finish counting your sig figs. So if we look at the first example, 0.0050, I ask myself, is a decimal point present or is it absent? We know the decimal point is present. So if a decimal point is present, we're going to start counting our significant figures from the Pacific, so the P's there, which is the left side of the number. Now, we are accustomed to always reading left to right. However, with significant figures, you want to get comfortable by reading left to right or right to left. And the way you're going to know which way to read the number is by determining if there is a decimal point. So if a decimal point is present, we are going to start counting those zeros from the Pacific side of the number, which is coming in from this direction, the typical way you would probably read. The only thing I need to know is I do not count beginning zeros. So coming in from this direction, these are all beginning zeros. So I will not count those. As soon as I hit my first non-zero number, I start counting that, and then I count every single number I see after it. It doesn't matter if they are zeros or 5s or 2s. It doesn't matter what the number is. As soon as you hit a non-zero, you count everything else. So that's why this first number will have 2 sig figs. Even though there's a 0, that 0 is not a beginning 0. Beginning zeros are the only ones that I do not count. Any other trailing, a 0 at the end, in the middle, all of those do get counted. All right, in my next example, I see again for that number that a decimal point is present. So I'm going to start counting my significant figures from the Pacific side of the number. Again, I'm going to cancel out any beginning zeros right off the bat. As soon as I hit a non-zero number, I'm going to start counting sig figs, and I will count every single number I see after that point. It doesn't matter what it is. So in the second example, I have 4 sig figs. All right, my next example is the number 500. For that one, I see that a decimal point is absent. There is no decimal point there. So in that case, I'm going to start counting my sig figs from the Atlantic side of the number. So now for this particular number, since that decimal point is absent, I'm going to come in from the Atlantic direction of the number. And that's important because now these zeros become beginning zeros. So I'm going to start counting as soon as I get rid of those beginning zeros, and this particular number only has 1 sig fig, which kind of makes sense Because let's say somebody asked you, if you were at an event, how many people were there? And you said, 500. It's very likely that you just rounded that you didn't actually sit there and count out 500 people. So the number 500, it should make sense to only have one sig fig. It's not a very certain measurement. All right, the next example we see, again, decimal point is absent. There's no decimal point, so I'm going to start counting my sig figs from the Atlantic side of the number. Don't count beginning zeros, but then I count every number I see after that. So this has 3 sig figs. And then my final example, this number does have a decimal point present, so I will start counting from the Pacific side of the number. There are no beginning zeros, so I'm just going to start counting, and then I count everything I see. So there's 4. The only thing I would caution you is some students see a decimal point and they treat it like a period, like in a sentence, and they want to stop counting. Don't do that. Just ignore the decimal point and you just count everything that you see as soon as you start counting. So don't treat that decimal point like a period or telling you to stop, because that's not the case. So hopefully this helps.